questions. And that's what our little story is all about. How did this happen? Why did it happen when it did happen? How did we get from this to this? And where do we go from here? Before we move more deeply into this story, there's a few clarifications that need to be made. First, we'll treat it as a given that the traditional Latin Mass, as it continues to be celebrated today, has been passed down virtually intact for over 1,500 years. And for the sake of brevity and simplicity, we will interchangeably use the terms Old Mass and New Mass for the traditional Latin Mass and the Mass of Pope Paul VI, respectively. Second, if you have previously seen any comparisons between the Old Mass and the New Mass, you have likely been treated to a solemn high Mass celebrated by a bishop or a cardinal, and saw it compared to a Mass celebrated by Father Skippy, or someone dressed in a clown outfit, or a congregation and a priest jumping around on a stage, or ranting away in some unintelligible language. We don't believe that such a comparison is either fair or honest. On the one hand, not every celebrant of the traditional Latin Mass is ideal in his approach to the liturgy, nor do they all follow the Roman Missal as they should. On the other hand, not every celebrant of the New Mass is Father Skippy or Padre Bozo. We began this presentation by showing the two Masses being offered on the same day in the same sanctuary, celebrating the same feast of our Blessed Mother. We feel that the comparison is fair and honest. How anyone chooses to view the comparison is beyond the scope of this presentation. And the third clarification we'd like to make is this. This presentation is not being made in order to demonstrate that one of these two Masses is better, superior, or more efficacious than the other. Our primary focus here is on those few questions that have already been posed, which we are about to get to now. The first of these questions can be addressed at least in part now. Why are there two Masses in the Roman Rite of the Catholic Church when for as long as memories can recall and history record there has only been one? The answer is fairly simple and straightforward. In 1969, a second Mass was introduced to the Roman Rite of the Catholic Church because a certain group of people, convinced that there was a better way of offering Mass, one that would be more beneficial to the Catholic faithful in the pew, gained the ear of those who were the most prominent churchmen of the day. When we look more closely at who these people were, we will have gone a long way to explaining how this happened. As soon as one even mentions the people responsible for the new Mass, the usual suspects are generally identified with dispatch. There is first, of course, Pope Paul VI, who is, unquestionably, clearly responsible for the official promulgation of the new Mass. Then there is the infamous, was he or was he not a Freemason, Archbishop Annibale Buonini, the head of the post-conciliar department in charge of implementing the Constitution on the liturgy, the Concilium. Australian Yves Dupont, who immediately went on the offense against the introduction of the new Mass, relates in his book, Catholic Prophecy, The Coming Chastisement, the first edition of which was published within a year of the introduction of Pope Paul's Missal, that the new Mass was opposed by the Synod of Bishops in 1967, but some Vatican officials, whom he does not identify, in contempt of the will of the bishops and enlisting the help of 6 non-Catholic ministers, went ahead with the final version of their work. The 6 non-Catholic ministers to whom Dupont referred, who are always included in the list of the usual suspects who devised the new Mass, 5 of whom are shown here with Pope Paul VI, are Dr. George, Canon Jasper, Dr. Shepherd, Dr. Coneth, Dr. Smith and Brother Thurian. Together they represent the World Council of Churches, the Church of England, the Lutheran Church, and the Protestant community of Taizé. DuPont's statement refers to the Synod of the World's Bishops held in Rome in 1967. At the Synod, the bishops were first introduced to the new Mass formulated by the Concilium, and the bishops were asked to approve it. But in fact, they did not approve it, they rejected it. However, as history now testifies, that did not put a stop to the work of Bognini's Concilium. But that was not all that occurred in 1967. Even as the bishops of the world were rejecting the Concilium's new Mass, the International Committee for English in the Liturgy, a group of experts formed by the bishops of 11 English-speaking countries to translate liturgical texts, commonly known by its acronym ICEL, was completing its first interpretation, and it was clearly an interpretation rather than a translation, of the traditional Latin Mass into the common English of the people. And in 1967, the construction of this church was completed. Perhaps you're wondering why I have chosen to focus so directly on this particular church and the timing of its construction. Well, this church is important in the scheme of things for two reasons. First, I'm familiar with it. It's where we went through the changes. It marks, as it were, a line in the sands of time, a dramatic shift from one thing to something quite different. In order to explain the second reason, we're going to have to go back into the mists of history to the 5th century, to St. Prosper of Aquitaine, a layman who became the secretary of Pope St. Leo the Great. St. Prosper is well known for his defense of St. Augustine against the Pelagians, but our interest in him here is limited to an ancient saying he coined, legum credende lex statuit supplicandi, which is generally shortened to lex orandi, lex credendi. It means the law of prayer sets the law of belief, or as you worship, so you believe. And clearly the reciprocal of this time-tested axiom is equally true. As you believe, so you worship. Let me provide an example. This is the church in which the Masses featured at the beginning of this presentation were offered. When this church was built in the early part of the 20th century, the old Mass, of course, was the only Mass offered here. In addition to the Mass, however, one was also able to witness the faith expressed by the people who worshipped here in the art and architecture that surrounded them, as well as in their music. In other words, just by observing how the people prayed, the various aspects of the prayer, the liturgy, the art, the architecture, the music, the lex orandi, one could determine what they believed, the lex credendi. Now, back to this church. We mentioned that this structure was completed in 1967, the same year the Synod of Bishops in Rome rejected the Concilium's new Mass, the same year that the first official English translation of the traditional Mass was completed. This is only 2 years after the Council ended, but it is also 2 years before the new Mass of Pope Paul VI was introduced to the world. Considering that the bulk of the construction on this church was completed before the bishops of the world had even seen the new Mass, and that it was completed even as the bishops were rejecting the project, where did this design come from? Who could have foreseen that the altar should be freestanding and no longer the center of focus, that the tabernacle should be hidden, that the sanctuary might be lowered, that all of the sacred objects so representative of the Catholic faith